All right, welcome back to another episode of the Agendas podcast. I'm your host, Harry, here with Ben.
What's going on, Harry? We forgot what number episode we're up to.
Yeah, I stopped doing the numbers for anyone listening. I just forgot, and I figured, like, who cares? Does anyone really care that this is episode 18 or 16? Like, no, nobody cares. The important thing is consistency, which we're trying to get better at. We're going to do a short little podcast here, shorter than our usual ones. Our normal ones are about probably 35 to 40 minutes. We just wanted to do a recap after game one and a preview for game two, just because some things we say tonight aren't going to apply if we did it after game two. And then we're probably going to do another short one after game two to preview game three, and then we'll see where it goes from there. But it was an interesting game one, a series that we both predicted Celtics in five. It felt pretty good. At times, me and Ben were on the phone for some of the game, and the Celtics had control. It seemed like for the first half. And then the Mavericks kind of went on a run there, and I kind of got scared. I was like, uh-oh, it looks like the Mavs kind of took the momentum. And like I told Ben, from what I've seen of the NBA playoffs, I've probably been watching for about 10 plus years now, I would say at this point. And the thing is, when in basketball especially, when you have the momentum, you got to create as big of a lead as you can, because there's going to come a time when the other team gets the momentum. That's just how sports works. Most games are not going to be a 40-point blowout. So, the Celtics built a 22-point lead, but it was like, if the Mavs can cut this to 10 or 8 or whatever going into the fourth quarter, it's anybody's game. And they cut it to 8 at one point, and they had a couple other possessions to get it even closer, if I remember. And I think there was a couple traveling violations. But Ben, I know you had a lot to say on this game, particularly on Luka's defense. What were your main takeaways after game one?
Yeah, yo, I'm fired. I'm ready to go. Um, you listen. Harry has creative control over this podcast, but I really hope this rant that I'm about to go on is the clip that comes out of this podcast. All right, Harry, are you ready?
I'm ready. Let's go. Let's get into it.
Luka Doncic was the reason the Dallas Mavericks lost Game 1. He was the reason. His offense, mediocre efficiency, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the defense. And not only the defense and how it improved Boston's offense, but his negative impact defensively affect Dallas's offense as well. Boston's entire offensive game plan was Luka, hey you big boy, get up in the pick and roll. Every single possession, they spammed it. Play after play after play. And obviously they blew right past him straight away. Tatum and Brown did a great job being aggressive there, and then good stuff happened, right? So that was Boston's offense. But this bled into Dallas's offense as well, because Luka having to play defense, point of attack, every single play, he got gassed. And I think that contributed to his mediocre efficiency. But also, he couldn't even be on the ball offensively, being the Dallas's point guard like he normally is. Oftentimes, on offense, Luka Doncic was standing in the corner because he was gassed and he just had nothing to give on offense. So Luka Doncic's defense was the sole reason or the primary reason why Dallas lost this game.
Yeah, I definitely hear where you're coming from. It's a point that, I've watched some of the shows. We are consumers of some of the shows, me particularly, like First Things First and whatever you see on Twitter and things like that. And people are acting like Luka had a good game. Luka did not have a good game. Like Ben was saying, he was getting exploited defensively. But even from a flat-out offensive perspective, everyone's like, he had 30 and 10. He was the first guy to have 30 and 10 in his finals debut since, I don't know, maybe it was Kareem, whatever it was. Like, he did not play well. If I give you 26 shots and you score 30 points, that's not impressive. 26 shots for 30 points? Just because you count the stats and it's 30 and 10. Oh, he had a good game. No, he didn't. I think it was 12 for 26, which is like, okay. But the other thing is he had one assist. I mean, you're the point guard of the team and you had one assist, and that might be pointing to what Ben was saying, where you're getting cooked constantly defensively. And the Celtics did what we said they need to do. They need to make Kyrie and Luka work defensively, because as much as people were hyping up, these are good defenders, no, they're not. People were not exploiting them like they could, and we saw the Celtics do that in game one. And I think that affects Luka's offense, especially his ability to play make, the energy he had on that side, because the Mavs as a team, I believe, had 9 assists. I mean, that's embarrassing. That's historically low. I think I saw a stat that it was the lowest in Mavericks history since the stat was being recorded. I mean, 9 assists. There was just no ball movement, lots of ISO one-on-one. And the Celtics were basically willing to say to the Mavs, if you want Luka to go one-on-one every play and get his step back, yeah, he might finish with 30 points, right? But it's not going to be that efficient. It's not going to be that effective. He's not going to get his teammates involved, and that's exactly what we saw. And the other thing we previewed from the Mavs offense side of it is it's Luka and Kyrie were going to have to be great to win the series, and not that the series is not over by any stretch. The Mavs could win Game 2 and they're back in control, but I'm just talking about strictly from a Game 1 perspective. Luka was not great offensively, and Kyrie was awful. 6 for 20, I think it was, or 6 for 19. And we mentioned if I'm having two picks of which player I want to guard Kyrie, Derek White might be one, and Drew Holiday might be two, or Drew Holiday might be one, and Derek White might be two. Maybe throw Alex Caruso in there. But I mean, they have the perfect defensive players to mess up Kyrie Irving, and he's been relatively inconsistent offensively this playoffs. And I think it's going to be a tough series for him. And Ben, do you see a world where Kyrie Irving turns it around this series and has some great games? Because I think it's going to be tough for Dallas to win this series without Kyrie having some moments.
Absolutely, yeah. I don't see Kyrie having really his moments. Listen, he had some open shots that he missed, so he is going to be closer to that 40+% percentage. I think he missed some open shots. I think, but Luka, this is roughly what I like offensively. This is what I predicted from Dallas, where Luka's gonna maybe I would expect Luka to have a bit higher, field goal percentage, but this is roughly what I thought it was going to be. It was not going to be Game 5 Timberwolves. This was going to be Luka high usage percentage, high points, mediocre to solid efficiency. And so I think we got what we got.
Yeah, I think I expect Luka to play a little bit better in some of the other games. I really didn't think he played too well. But again, like you're saying, the Celtics are just too good defensively, and they match up so much better than the Timberwolves did. Because I know the Timberwolves had a historic offense, but we talked about it. Their offense came from, or their defense came from Rudy Gobert, right? Who's a great rim protector, but that's not going to stop Luka and Kyrie, right? They're going to cook him. And then they had like Jaden McDaniels, who was just too small for Luka. But with the Celtics, we saw Jason Tatum on Luka. We saw Jaylen Brown. We saw even some Drew Holiday. They just have more bodies to throw at him, and I think they can affect him. But more so Kyrie, I think is going to struggle significantly in this series. I wouldn't be surprised if Luka had a 40-point game or two, whatever it is. But again, I don't think it's going to be that impactful, and especially with that one assist. I mean, that's really where you take your game to the next level. There's a lot of guys in the NBA who could score 30 points. But where Luka really separates himself from a lot of these guys is his ability to play make along with scoring those 30 points. And Ben, do you have anything else to add from the Mavs side of things before I want to talk about Porzingis? I want to get into a little bit Porzingis because that was a big storyline for Game 1 as well.
Right, yeah. I'll just throw in on Boston defensively. I think where Luka and the Mavs really excelled offensively and was kind of getting out in transition when they were able to force stops from Boston and get moving down the court. I think that's when I got scared of Dallas. So I think they're going to try to do that as much as possible, obviously. And then the other thing I'll say in the half court, like you were just saying, Boston did a very good job of making every shot on Luka tough. It wasn't one-on-one where he was creating a ton of space. Even when it was they did a very good job of bringing help without overhelping. And so every shot for Luka was tough, and he made a lot of tough shots. And obviously didn't come out to a great field goal percentage. In other games, it's going to come out to a better field goal percentage because you're not going to stop him. But I would fall on the floor if he had a Game 5 Timberwolves game this series.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. I just think they're too good defensively. And we've seen strategy from other teams. I've seen this. I remember the Suns played Jokic, I think it was last year, and they had a game where they're just like, yeah, Jokic, you can score as much as you want. And I think he scored 50, and they still lost because that's not how you elevate the offense of a team. Even if but I think Boston's okay with, my point is, I don't know if Luka's going to have this type of game, but I think Boston will be okay if Luka scored 40 points. As long as he's not getting his teammates involved, the Mavs offense is going to be capped at a certain level. And again, the Celtics are not the Timberwolves offensively, right? They're just so much better. The other thing we have to get into is Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. I mean, Jaylen Brown played pretty good, but it wasn't like an A-plus game. He played really good defensively, but it wasn't like an A-plus offensive 30-point game. And Tatum played pretty bad this game, and they still won handily, right? Obviously, some of that was due to Porzingis and things like that. But I think Boston can play much better offensively, which is a little bit scary for Dallas. But I want to get into Porzingis a little bit because Porzingis was a big storyline for this game. He hadn't played since early in the playoffs. And he came out. I mean, he came off the bench. They decided to bring him off the bench. It sounded like he could have played in the Pacers series. I saw a couple reports that he really could have played in the Pacers series, but they wanted to give him some extra rest, and they weren't really too concerned. Like, let's say the Pacers were like they tied the series at 2. I think Porzingis would have played, but they just weren't too concerned with that. But he came off the bench. But when he came in, I mean, he absolutely lit it up, especially in the first half. I think he had finished with 21 points in 20 minutes. He he brings a whole new dynamic to their team outside of just his scoring. His ability to stretch the floor. Dallas really struggled with that, even in terms of transition. Like he would pull up, he would kind of sag behind the offense and could just kind of stand by the 3 point line, and they'd get it to him, and he'd nail those threes. Obviously, he's not going to hit 75% of his threes for the whole series, but he just brings a whole new dynamic that's something that Dallas has to worry about outside of Tatum and Brown, the main star players. Is there's a center who can shoot the lights out, right? And defensively, he was a phenomenal too, protecting the rim. I mean, Derrick Jones Jr. struggled this game. Dallas wasn't really able to get much going at the rim. And I think a lot of that has to do with Porzingis and his rim protection. As much as Al Horford is a savvy veteran, and I think he plays a part in this team, and he's important in terms of leadership, and he can give them some good minutes, hit some threes. But I think them having Porzingis really takes them to the next level, and I think that's going to make it really hard for Dallas to win the series, especially with how good he looked in Game 1.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. And then the other thing I'll just add that Porzingis can do is he kind of is almost an ISO scorer, where against those centers, he was cooking those guys and just scoring in isolation. And if he's going to be matched up one-on-one because of everybody else around him on Boston, he's going to be a threat offensively. And that Al Horford can shoot a little bit, he can protect the rim a little bit, he has zero ISO offensive game. So that's just a whole other dynamic. And then just from a general perspective, as an anti-Luka guy, watching him just get cooked every play in the pick and roll, like literally every single play. And then on the other end, Porzingis, who he may stand in the corner for a year and a half, now comes out and cooks him. Oh man, I had a blast Game 1.
You should have heard Ben on the phone. He was going crazy. I don't remember a sporting event, and me and Ben have watched a lot of sporting events, whether together or on the phone, whatever it is. I haven't heard him this excited ever. We'll see how it goes. Again, the series can turn so quick. The Mavs win Game 2, all of a sudden the Mavs are in control of the series. That's how these things go. But I want to do a quick preview of Game 2. For first question is, we both picked the Celtics in 5. Do you feel better about that? Worse about that? Do you think it's going to be Celtics in 4 now? Is there something you saw that maybe the Mavericks, might have some advantage that you didn't quite see? How are you feeling about your pre-series prediction after Game 1?
I'm feeling very good about my prediction. I saw some stuff on both sides. Obvious, from what I saw really on Boston's side, obviously just spamming Luka in the pick and roll. And I want to get into some adjustments that Dallas is going to do because they started with that, and I think there's more to come in terms of adjustments to stop at that as much as possible. But Boston being willing to spam Luka in the pick and roll every single play is just going to create easy offense, and no matter what adjustments Dallas makes, that's going to be available for stretches of games. That's not getting permanently deleted. Luka's going to be on the floor, and that's going to be available for certain stretches. So to me, that gives Boston a certain floor. And when they can do that for longer stretches, it limits Dallas offense in that regard. So that's what makes me feel really good about Boston about Game 1. In terms of Dallas, what makes me feel good if I'm a Dallas fan is when Dallas was able to get into a normal game, right? When they were able to avoid the Luka pick and roll every play, and they were able to get some stops and get out in transition, they cut a 30-point lead down quick. So in just more of a normal dynamic game, it seemed like Dallas had at least a somewhat of an edge over Boston. So if Dallas can keep it into a normal situation, I think that would scare me as a Boston fan.
Yeah, if I'm a Dallas fan, I want to get into some things that I might be optimistic about even after a game like this. First of all, yeah, like Ben said, the ability to cut the lead from 30 down to, I think it was 8 at one point. It was insane, and it happened quick, and they were hitting their shots, but it wasn't like, oh shoot, like Luka just hit 5 threes in a row. Like he was hitting shots and stuff like that, but they kind of just like worked their way back into the game. I mean, the other thing, obviously, we haven't touched on this yet, is the 3-point percentage disparity. I think Dallas shot, in the 20%, and I think Boston shot almost 40%. But I think Boston shot 39%, which I saw a stat. I think they did like 50 times this year because Boston's just the best shooting team in basketball, right? So it's like, is that going to come down? I don't know. I don't know if Dallas has the personnel to really slow them down. Obviously, they're probably going to have a game or two where they're missing their threes, and Dallas might have a shot to win those games. But again, Boston's just a better shooting team, right? And we talked about this on Dallas, right? Obviously, Luka is great offensively, and I expect Kyrie to have a better game in Game 2. As much as I think he might struggle in this series, I don't think he's going to be that bad. But like the other players that were stepping up for Dallas is PJ Washington just going to hit 7 threes in a game like he did in the playoffs, or 5 threes in a game? Is Derrick Jones Jr. just going to start hitting his threes? I mean, that's what they're relying on, in terms of their 3-point shooting. So I wouldn't necessarily expect that to, obviously it might not be 40% in the 20%, but there is going to be some disparity because Boston's just a better shooting team. But again, if you're a Dallas Mavericks fan, you could say, we cut the lead down to 8. I think after the first quarter, it might have been like I think Boston outscored them by 1. I saw some stat like that. So after the first quarter, they kind of calmed down. Obviously, those stats are a little bit weird because like obviously Boston knew that they had a 20-point lead, so they're going to play differently than if it's a one point game. So I don't love those stats. But if you're trying to be optimistic from a Dallas perspective, it's like we held Tatum down pretty well. Offensively, none of their team really took off outside of Porzingis, which they weren't really sure how healthy he was and how well he was going to play. So he might have snuck up on them a little bit. Maybe they can make some adjustments. Um, and then the other thing is in terms of 3-point shooting, can they hit more threes and kind of close that gap in terms of percentage and how many threes they're making? I think those are the two main keys to can they turn the series around. But Ben, from a Dallas perspective, what optimism would you have potentially, or are you just done? The series is over. There's nothing we can do.
Yeah, so like you said, the 3-point percentage, I think there's going to be a gap there. I mean, if Boston's generating open looks because they're constantly getting into the paint and blowing by the point of attack, they're just open threes are going to get hit at 39% by those shooters. And Dallas's role players played terrible in game 1, so they're going to play probably once you get to those home games, they might play a little bit better. So that is going to come closer together, but there's going to be a disparity, I think. To me, Dallas, it starts on the defensive end because their best offense was getting out quickly, even if it's not full transition, but at least semi-transition. And in terms of like adjustments, when I promise you, Dallas stopped the 30-point lead and started cutting into it in the second quarter immediately when they went to zone coverage because you can't spam Luka into the pick and roll if he's in zone coverage. I promise you that was the moment, and immediately they started cutting into the lead. And also, Dallas did a good job of when they came out of zone, it wasn't because Boston forced them out by scoring. Boston hadn't figured it out yet, right? NBA teams take a little while to figure out zone coverage. Boston hadn't figured it out. Dallas was disciplined and came out early enough that they can bring it back again, and Boston still has to figure it out. So I hope Boston's working on that in these 3 off days. Obviously, Dallas can't play zone the whole time. So I'm expecting some doubling on the ball, and we're going to have to see if Tatum and Brown are good enough to pass out of that. And you're going to see some scrambling where Luka gets sent into the pick and roll, and then before the drive happens, somebody scrambles from a different guy and they switch really quick. I think you're going to see some of that. You saw some of that against Minnesota when Luka got put on the ball. And I think that was my biggest, I loved that Boston spammed him into the pick and roll, but they would get him at the point of attack, and then Brown, but really Tatum more than Brown, would just, after he was guarding them, they would wait 3, 4, 5 dribbles before they would attack. And that's going to give Dallas time to be able to, get somebody else on them or do what they're going to do. So I want to see Boston be a little bit more aggressive, but I think it starts overall on the defensive end, getting stops for Dallas. That's how they're going to be able to make a competitive game. And to me, when I saw in game 1, they were better than Boston in that scenario. So if they can get stops, that's what I would be hoping for Dallas.
Yeah, the zone defense. When they switched to that, I know Ben was like, "Oh, Boston can't get by the zone defense." From what I've seen in the NBA, like Ben mentioned, it just takes teams a little bit to get adjusted to it. When you're playing, most teams are not playing zone defense. The Miami Heat will do it with Spoelstra a little bit because it takes discipline and it takes a certain intelligence to be able to play zone defense that most NBA teams are like. It's just easier to play man to man, But it just takes teams a little bit to get adjusted. So I've seen that a lot of times where a team will just switch to zone and the other team will forget how to play basketball for 5 minutes. And then it's like, okay, we figured it out and they're back to cooking again. So some teams bring it up, they'll bring it up with 3 minutes left in the fourth quarter because another team's like, oh shoot, what do we do? They've been doing this for the whole game. And now what do we do? I think it was kind of like a Hail Mary by Dallas. Let's see if this works too, just because nothing else was working. But I want to close out the podcast with a little bit of a preview for game 2. What do you think is going to happen? I guess I'll start. I expect Jason Tatum to be much better. Obviously, I don't think Porzingis is going to have quite as good of a game as he did. I expect Kyrie to be a little bit better. I expect Dallas to try some things defensively that are maybe a little bit bold. Maybe they play a lot more zone defense, or maybe they start doubling right up the court. Maybe they guard 94 feet. Something bold, because I think that they have to. Basically, they're not as talented. I think they saw that in game 1. And I hope Dallas can pass the ball a little bit better, play make. not have 9 assists, but I expect that will come, especially with Kyrie playing a little bit better. The role players, I don't think Dallas role players necessarily step up in game 2. I think, like Ben said, role players tend to play better at home. But I do expect Boston to come out on top again in game 2. I think it'll be a much closer game. I don't think it's going to be a 20-point game in the first quarter. But I expect Boston to take a commanding 2-0 lead going back to Dallas, which might not be so commanding because I guess it's their home games, obviously. But I think Boston to take care of home court and go back to Dallas up 2-0.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Dallas is going to come out with something else defensively. And I think that's how well Boston is able to react to that right out the gate is going to have an impact. I think it's either going to be an impact on what this game is going to be. If Boston can figure that out quickly, I think the series is over. Like I said, my nerves with Boston is when Dallas tricked them. Dallas was not in zone for the whole second and the whole third. They were doing other stuff in the third quarter. So my concern for Boston is, can they respond to these adjustments? If Dallas is going to make an adjustment, we'll see if Boston can respond. And how well Boston responds, I think, could end the series literally in the first quarter, in my opinion. But I expect Boston to win this game. I obviously expect it to be much closer. But if Dallas doesn't have an answer for how to not get Luka in the pick and roll, and Boston just keeps spamming it, that's over. Dallas needs to answer. I know I've been harping on this. This was one thing over and over and over again. It wasn't a talent thing. It was, we know your weakness, and we're going to hit it again and again and again and again. And Dallas needs to see if they can find an answer because Luka's not coming off the court.
And again, I think even if Boston goes up 2-0, I don't think the series is over. We've seen it over and over. Home court, doesn't necessarily matter. But
no, not
Dallas
because
is
they
going
won
back.
game 2. But I'm not saying because they won game 2 the series is over. I'm saying if Dallas can't figure out something defensively, I don't know how they win the series.
Yeah, 100%. But my point is, if Boston goes up 2-0, everyone's like, the series is over. I've seen series flip too much in my basketball watching. That it's never over. And if the team was up 3-0, then I would say it's pretty much over. But 2-0, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. And the other thing is, I see a scenario where Dallas makes some adjustments and they're, let's say, up 10 in the first quarter. And the question for Boston is, where they haven't really been tested this playoffs necessarily, is that 10 going to spiral and become 30 and they get blown out and all of a sudden it's a scary hours for them? Or are they able to kind of adjust and all of a sudden by halftime they're up 4 points and it's okay, it feels like they're kind of in control?
For sure. I mean, listen, Boston did stop it at 8 and then made it back to 20. So that is some level of backbone.
Agreed. I was impressed because we were on the phone together. I thought Boston was kind of spiraling out of control. But Ben, was there anything else to add before, to end this podcast? And then again, we'll do another one after game 2.
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you for having me.
No problem. All right, have a good one. Don't forget to check us out on Twitter and YouTube at The Agendas Pod. And we'll see you guys after game 2.